Somewhere in this galaxy right now, a tomb world's lights are flickering back on. Nothing inside that vault has moved in 60 million years, until today. This video covers the entire Necron story, start to absolute finish. One species, one betrayal, 60 million years of sleep, and one comeback. You will understand all of it in about 25 minutes. No prior knowledge required. We are starting from absolute zero today. Everything else in this franchise's ancient history connects back to this one story. It starts with a species so short-lived, they built cities as graves. It ends with an empire that is still waking up right now. Every date, every name, and every event here is pulled from real lore. Nothing in this timeline is invented to fill a gap in the story. Warhammer 40,000 rewards patience, and this is the patience payoff video. Every faction you already love eventually collides with what you are about to learn. Before the timeline starts, a few words need defining right now. The Necrontyr were the mortal species that existed before the Necrons did. Biotransference is the process that turned living Necrontyr into living metal. The C10 were ancient star gods who demanded worship in exchange for power. A silent king ruled the Necrontyr, and later the Necrons, through silence itself. He spoke only through two other rulers, which is where his title comes from. The Great Sleep is the 60 million year hibernation this whole video explains. Keep those 5 terms in mind, they will repeat throughout this entire story. You will recognize every single one of those terms by the video's end. One more thing before we start. This is not a story about robots. It is a story about a species that traded its soul for survival. The Necrontyr began on a small radiation-blasted world orbiting a dying star. That star bathed their entire planet in constant, inescapable, lethal radiation. Every Necrontyr who was ever born carried radiation sickness in their blood. Their natural lifespans were short, painful, and never fully predictable. So Necrontyr culture organized itself completely around the certainty of dying young. Their cities were not built as homes, they were built as tombs. Imagine growing up in a city designed to bury you, not house you. For thousands of years, Necrontyr scientists searched for a medical cure. Every single attempt to fix their bodies through science completely failed. Would you have kept searching for a cure after every single failure? So they turned to the stars instead, hoping to simply outrun their fate. Necrontyr ships were slow, nothing like the instant travel other races used. Crews traveled for centuries at a time, sealed inside stasis crypts. Even their hulls were wrapped in living metal, just to survive the void. That living metal is the same material that would later become their bodies. Eventually, these slow, desperate ships met a far older, far wealthier species. That species calls themselves the Old Ones, and they seem nearly immortal. The contrast broke something in the Necrontyr the moment they saw it. Here was a hopeful, long-lived people who never feared their own death. Would you stay calm, meeting a people who never had to watch a clock? That single moment of envy turned into total, permanent, species-wide hatred. The Necrontyr declared outright war on the Old Ones almost immediately after. It was, by any honest measure, a war they could never actually win. The Old Ones controlled the Webway, a network of instant interstellar travel. Necrontyr fleets simply could not keep pace with an enemy that fast. Slowly, the Necrontyr were pushed back to the galaxy's outer edge. That edge is known today as the Halo Stars, far from everything. Picture losing a war so completely, you get pushed to the edge of everything. For thousands more years, the Necrontyr sat trapped at that ragged border. Their rage at the Old Ones never cooled, it just changed shape. That rage widened into something colder, a hatred of all living things. A cornered, dying species does not usually grow more forgiving over time. The Necrontyr needed a weapon powerful enough to finally end the standoff. So Necrontyr scholars studied the stars themselves. searching for anything usable. What they found was older than the old ones, older than the galaxy. Vast beings of pure energy lived inside stars, feeding on their light. The Necrontyr named these beings Citan, which translates loosely as star gods. What do you offer a god that has never once needed a body? So the Necrontyr built the Citan bodies out of their own living metal. The first Citan to wear a body was known as the Nightbringer. Once it had a body, the Nightbringer did not behave like a grateful guest. The Necrontyr had built a god a house, and the god moved in permanently. More Citan followed, each one wearing a body forged by Necrontyr hands. Not every Citan behaved exactly the same way once it wore a body. One shard, later called the Void Dragon, cared only about raw destructive power. Another shard, called the Outsider, was already unstable before it even arrived. For a time, the Necrontyr simply worshipped these star gods as deities. That worship curdled quickly into something closer to outright slavery. The gods the Necrontyr built with their own hands began ruling them instead. Centuries later, Necrontyr power was still held by a ruling council of 3. That council was called the Triarch, and it governed every Necrontyr dynasty. One of the 3 pharaohs was named the Silent King by ancient tradition. He spoke to his people only through the words of his fellow rulers. Try picturing a ruler who never once spoke to you directly, only through others. The final Silent King, the Necrontyr ever crowned, was named Sarek. Sarek inherited a species still trapped, still dying, still losing its war. Then one of the Catan approached him directly with a very different offer. Among his own kind, this particular Citan was known as the Deceiver. The Deceiver told Sarek a story about an older, hidden war altogether. Long before the Necrontyr existed, he claimed the Citan fought the old ones too. And lost, the Deceiver said, forcing every surviving Citan into hiding ever since. Help us finish that old war, the Deceiver offered, and immortality is yours. New bodies, unbreakable and undying, built from the same living metal already known. One voice inside the royal court spoke firmly against accepting that offer. The court astrologer, a Necrontyr named Orikin, saw exactly where this led. Orikin warned that this alliance would win glory and destroy their souls forever. Would you have believed the astrologer, or trusted the god's easy promise instead? Sarek and the Triarch debated Orikin's warning for 1 full Terran year. In the end, desire for victory outweighed one astrologer's uncomfortable prophecy. The Triarch said yes and doomed their entire species with a single word. The Citan revealed exactly what immortality would actually cost the Necrontyr. Picture an entire civilization walking willingly into furnaces built by their own hands. Nobody dragged them in. They walked forward believing they were finally being saved. Massive biofurnaces were built, burning day and night without ever stopping. Necrontyr flesh went into those furnaces and never came back out again. What emerged instead were new bodies built completely from living necrodermis metal. The Citan crowded around every furnace, drinking in something as it burned. Try to imagine watching your own family walk into that furnace willingly. That something was a raw Necrontyr life energy released the moment flesh died. Every single Necrontyr who transformed made the watching Citan stronger and hungrier. Sarek went through the same furnace as every one of his people. His new body was stronger, faster, and immune to age or sickness, but something else was missing the instant he woke up inside it. Sarek felt a hollow, aching absence where something essential used to sit. In that instant, the Silent King understood exactly what Orikin had meant. The price of an undying body had been every Necrontyr's actual soul. Would that trade have felt worth it to you in that first cold moment? Sarek was not the only one who felt that hollowness after the change. Every single Necrontyr who transformed lost that same piece of themselves too. Ordinary citizens simply had less say in the matter than their own king did. Most Necrons alive today have never known anything except that empty, silent feeling. The Necrontyr, as a people, were now simply gone, replaced completely. In their place stood a new, soulless, unbreakable species called the Necrons. Every Necron mind also carried something new, an embedded command protocol. That protocol guaranteed total obedience to Sarek, whether his people liked it or not. Would you trade your entire inner life away just to stop being afraid? Fully armed with new bodies, the Necrons resumed the war immediately. The Necrons call this entire conflict the War of Aeons, not a myth. Most of the galaxy remembers it today as the War in Heaven instead. That earlier war deserves its own full-length video, and it will get one. For now, here is only the part that matters to the Necron story. United with the Citan, Necron legions finally broke through the webway itself. Entire planets were razed, and whole star systems were simply extinguished. The Citan, gorged on captured life energy, became nearly impossible to stop. You can probably guess which side had the Citan's hunger working in its favor. Historians and cryptechs alike still argue over how long that war actually lasted. What nobody disputes is which two sides walked away from it changed forever. One by one, the strongholds of the Old One's allies started falling. Eventually, the Old Ones themselves were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. The species the Necrontyr had hated for millennia simply ceased to exist. Sharek had waited the entire war for exactly one specific moment to arrive. He needed the Old Ones gone, and the Citan exhausted from winning. The instant the Old Ones fell, Sarek gave the order to strike. The Necrons turned on the very gods who had just won them the galaxy. The Citan never saw the betrayal coming, confident in their own supremacy. Necron cryptechs had secretly built weapons designed specifically to kill living gods. Would you have trusted your own engineers to build a god-killing weapon? These hypercannons unleashed forces so extreme they damaged causality itself. But a Citan is not a creature that can simply be killed outright. A Citan is a fragment of reality's own fabric, older than the stars. So Sarek's forces settled for the next best outcome available to them. Each Citan was shattered into thousands of smaller, weaker fragments instead. Every shard was sealed inside a prison called a Tesseract Labyrinth. Imagine trapping a hostile god in a box you built yourself, forever. Necron ships scattered those sealed shards to hiding places across the galaxy. One shard was buried somewhere no living species was ever meant to find. That victory came at an almost unbearable price for the Necrons themselves. Millions of Necrons were destroyed fighting gods their own kind had built. Would you call 60 million dead worth the price of that revenge? Every member of the Triarch died in that war, except Sharek himself. Sharek was so shaken by the weapons that he wiped the memory of them. He feared what his own people might do with that knowledge someday. Sarek had won his war of betrayal, but the cost was almost total. Victory over the Citan did not actually mean the Necrons controlled the galaxy. Another species had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout that entire war. That species was the Eldari, and they despised everything the Necrons stood for. The Necrons, gutted from their own war of betrayal, could not fight them. Sharek made a decision that would define the next 60 million years. Let the Eldari have the galaxy, he reasoned. Their time will pass too. Every remaining Necron city was converted into a tomb world instead. Each tomb world was threaded with thousands of individual stasis crypts. Sharek's final order was simple: sleep for 60 million standard years. Wake only when ready to rebuild every dynasty back to full glory. Could you give an order like that? One you would never see finished? Then Sharek did something almost nobody in his position would ever choose. He destroyed his own command protocols, the exact thing that controlled his people. He gave up total, guaranteed obedience as his own final act of penance. Sarek believed he had failed his people by ever trusting the deceiver, so he sailed alone into the total darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. Would you give up control over everyone right after finally winning it? Not every Necron dynasty entered the Great Sleep in exactly the same way. Some tomb worlds were buried deep underground, hidden from any outside discovery. Others were sealed in orbit, drifting quietly disguised as dead, empty moons. That single choice, decided 60 million years ago, still matters today. It decides whether a dynasty wakes up intact or wakes up broken. An entire separate video covers every dynasty's fate, name by name. For most Necrons, the Great Sleep was not a peaceful, dreamless kind of rest. Stasis crypts preserve a body, but they do not guarantee anyone a safe awakening. Some warriors woke mid-crisis, mid-battle, or mid-collapse of their own tomb. Others never fully woke, and nobody left alive can explain exactly why. Out in the void, Sarek did not simply drift and wait quietly. He fought unknown wars against unknown enemies in realms beyond this galaxy. Little detail survives about exactly who or what he actually fought out there. Some accounts describe him trading, others describe him conquering deep in that void. Either way, the exile was real, and it lasted the entire 60 million years. Imagine 60 million years of silence, with only your own thoughts for company. What matters is that he stayed there, alone, guarding his sleeping people's border. For 60 million years, one exiled king stood watch over an empty galaxy. Meanwhile, back home, entire empires rose and fell without a single Necron noticing. The Great Sleep was always supposed to end on its own schedule. Instead, Sarek himself broke the silence first, centuries before most tomb worlds stirred. In the year 774 of the 41st millennium, he returned. Out in the void, Sarek had encountered something that truly alarmed him. That something was the Tyranids, an extragalactic swarm that consumes all life. If the Tyranids consumed every living thing, Necron plants would die with it. Sarek's people needed living bodies eventually to finally escape their own soullessness. A galaxy with no living species left would ruin that plan completely. So the Silent King broke his exile and sailed back toward home. Would you have made the same call, breaking a 60 million year vow? He returned with a new Triarch, rebuilt from scratch after millions of years. He also carried a single captured Citan shard, one he called the Enchained. What Sarek found waiting for him was not the empire he had planned. Countless tomb worlds had been destroyed completely during those 60 million years. Try to imagine coming home to find most of your home already gone. Others were still fully asleep, deaf to every signal Sarek sent them. The ones that had woken up were often damaged, confused, or badly incomplete. Other species had spent that time settling directly on top of Necron graves. Humanity itself had built entire civilizations without ever noticing what slept below. Sarek's original dream never actually died, even after everything that went wrong. He still hopes to find a living species willing to host Necron minds someday. Sarek could not simply announce himself and demand instant galaxy-wide obedience, so he traveled in secret, tomb world to tomb world, rebuilding belief quietly. He worked through ordinary overlords and cryptechs who never knew who guided them. Would you recognize a returning king who refused to ever say his name? Today, dynasties are waking up at wildly different rates and different strengths. The single largest awakened Necron army belongs to a pharaoh called Imhotep. Imhotep commands the Sautek dynasty, and he has never lost a war. He is also increasingly open about disagreeing with Sarek's long-term plan. That kind of internal tension is common. 60 million years does that to unity. So, what does an actual Necron awakening look like on the ground today? In the year 955, Necron legions attacked the world of Gehenna. Blood Angels commander Dante and his company met them there in force. For 3 straight solar weeks, neither side could gain a real advantage. Dante fought a silent king whose forces bent space and time itself. Picture fighting your ancient enemy and a Tyranid swarm on the same afternoon. Then a Tyranid splinter fleet dropped into orbit, uninvited, over both armies. Necrons and Blood Angels stopped fighting each other almost without discussion. For one battle only, ancient enemies fought side by side against the Tyranids. Once the Tyranids were gone, both sides simply walked away from each other. Neither army had the strength left to restart a fight nobody could win. That uneasy standoff is exactly what a modern Necron awakening actually looks like. There is one more piece of this story that changes everything you just learned. Trazyn the Infinite is a Necron overlord obsessed with collecting rare artifacts. He actually woke up early from the Great Sleep, centuries ahead of schedule. Near the end of the 41st millennium, Trazyn noticed something was wrong. Ancient devices called pylons, built by his own people, were being disturbed. Those pylons sat quietly on the imperial fortress world of Cadia for millennia. Nobody realized what those pylons had actually been doing the entire time. They were quietly holding back the raw power of the warp itself. Necron engineering, built ages before humanity existed, was propping up Cadia's safety. Trazyn traveled to Cadia himself once he realized what was actually happening. He worked directly alongside Imperial forces to try to reactivate those pylons. You already know Cadia falls, but you have never heard this specific reason why. Around the year 999, Cadia was destroyed despite his effort. Cadia's destruction tore open a massive galaxy-splitting wound called the Great Rift. That single wound now cuts the entire galaxy into 2 separate halves. 60-million-year-old Necron technology had been holding that wound shut. Nobody in the wider galaxy knew that fact until it was too late. Trazyn still holds a captured shard of the Deceiver, locked away today. He is reportedly interrogating that shard about how to enter the Great Rift. Remember the Void Dragon, one of the C10 shards sealed after the betrayal. That shard is still imprisoned today, sealed in a vault deep beneath Mars. The Adeptus Mechanicus worships something in that vault as their own machine god. They built an entire religion around a caged Necron god without ever knowing it. That single, unresolved thread means this 60-million-year story is not finished. Everything Sharek built, lost, and slept through is still actively unfolding today. You are watching that unfinished story continue, whether you realize it or not. Somewhere out there, a tomb world nobody has heard of is opening right now. So, that is the entire Necron story, start to finish, in one sitting. One radiation-blasted species traded its soul for a body that cannot die. It won a war, betrayed its own gods, then slept for 60 million years. Now it is awake again, scattered, damaged, and still led by one tired king. Every dynasty you will ever hear about traces straight back to this exact story. Every rank, from warrior to Faeron, exists because of what Sarek built. If this made you want the full War in Heaven story, it is coming. If you want every single Necron dynasty ranked, that video already exists now. This channel covers Warhammer 40,000's real, documented lore. Nothing invented for clicks. Subscribe if you want the rest of this galaxy's history explained the same way. So, which part of this 60-million-year story surprised you the most? Tell me below, and I will see you in the next explainer soon.